So Alan, look, thanks for coming in and chatting with us. I really appreciate the work you've done with my students and in the system, and I've certainly want to appreciate what I've learned from you, and I'm hoping that we can share some of that today, a little bit what I've learned and what some of my students have learned. So you've been very generous with your time.
Oh, thank you.
So maybe take us back to the beginning of where you got to in your commercial pursuit of trying to work out what am I going to do with my life.
The entrepreneur story. Yeah, okay. So I was in the restaurant equipment industry. I went to Chicago to attend a trade show. It's a global trade show. And when I was in Chicago on the evenings out, I could see that there's all these home delivery pizza shops opening up all over Chicago. It was the latest big trend in America. And I went, wow, that'll come to Australia. And so I went and found the factory at the trade show that had these ovens that were approved by the major chains. And I negotiated the Australian rights for these pizza ovens. And so came back to Australia, got on a plane, went down to Sydney to see Pizza Hut, who were the biggest players in town, and said, are you guys going to get into home delivery like you do in the States? And they said, sure are. Would you buy these ovens? This is the spec sheets of what they look like and the approved. And they said, yep, sure will. What's your program? 3 months before we'll be ready to go. I said, great. Signed an order for 14 ovens, or one 40-foot container full of ovens. Came back, rang the factory. Really excited. I got my first order. I've got a 40-foot container. I want to get underway for Pizza Hut. And they said, congratulations, wonderful news. That's 180,000 cash up front. I was like, hang on a minute, I've got Pizza Hut. You know, like they're not going broke. No, you're a new distributor, cash up front. Okay, so my partner and I, who was the engineer technical person for the team, we both mortgaged our houses to the hilt, borrowed off the aunties and uncles, did the whole 9 yards, right? Got the cash, sent it to America. 3 months later, the ovens arrive. I jump on the plane, go down to see Pizza Hut to organise the rollout. And so, look, we're getting trouble from the Sydney councils. They're taking a lot longer than we thought to get approvals to do these stores. We're going to be maybe 3 months late. Oh, God. So I get back and I thought, well, I'll go and see if I can sell some of these ovens to these mum and pup pizza shops, you know, because they were just a wonderful piece of technology. And you get to the pitch about how the labour saving was good and how energy savings were great, but you'd always get to how much. And it was $27,500. Well, the old Baker style ovens they used to use in those days were $6,000. So they'd all say, piss off, I'm going to give it 27 grand. So each night I'm knocking on the doors trying to get an oven, and each week I'm starting to get letters from the bank saying, where's the interest and all the arrears for the money that you borrowed? And I kept on saying, oh, it's coming, but Pizza Hut kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed until finally I got to the stage where, you know, the demand is 14 days to repay the capital or you close down. So I suddenly thought, well, I'm stuck in a jam. Maybe if I go back to some of my hot prospects and said, listen, what about renting the oven for us? Because I thought if I could get the rent coming in, and that could pay the interest off at the bank and I can get a bit more breathing space until Pizza Hut comes online. So I went to these customers and said, what about just, don't have to come up with 27 grand, I'll just rent you the oven and you can pay me a weekly fee. And I said, oh, great. And then someone said, well, if I rent it from you and I decide to buy it, how much of the rent are you going to give me back? That's a good question. So I worked out I could give him 75% of the rent he paid back off the price, but he had to sign a 12-month contract. He could buy it any time, but minimum was 12 months. Well, that worked really well. And all the young entrepreneurs who wanted to buy more of these pizza ovens, the banks weren't financing them because they were young kids in business. You know, they weren't going to give them a chance. They didn't have a big house. So the rental side of it was going really well. And finally, Pizza Hut got their act together and the rollout of the stores happened. We went from 27th in the world to #1 in the world for 3 out of the next 4 years for global sales. Wow. And we kept taking the profits to fund the young kids into the rental business by renting them ovens along the way. So that's the starting journey for us, yeah.
So this sort of explains, I guess, how did you get to the company obviously grew and became quite a substantial company.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I guess what you're describing is in the early days the rent to own sort of, which was obviously commercial and then became a private sector sort of thing for individuals. And this resulted in success by the sounds of things, from what I've heard.
Very much so. So we built up a significant business, but because the rental side of it was such a capital-hungry business, it kept soaking up all the capital, I kept on having to expand the sales side of the business to get the money to be able to fund the rental programs. And we eventually became the biggest equipment supplier to McDonald's and Hungry Jack's and all the major chains across Australia. And eventually I sold off the equipment sales business and I just kept the rental division And I went from 150 employees to 6. Life was really simple. I had no debt. I was bombing along quite a nice little spot I was. And then I got to the stage where I was getting bored. So I asked myself the question about, why do I want to make more money? I'm living in a comfortable old Queenslander. I wasn't into flash cars or boats or any of that sort of stuff. So I ran a wine, food and jazz festival for a while, and then I got involved in charities and did microfinance for women in the developing world, where you could provide a $200 loan that would start a small business. And in the developing world, when you're on $2 a day, this really could have some significant impact on life. So I really got excited about that. And then they asked me to volunteer for them in Queensland to do some fundraising. And I went, cool, I'm in this no man's land, not quite knowing what my next steps are going to be anyway. And so I thought, yeah, look, I can volunteer for you, but I want to go to the field first to see the outcomes of what your pretty little brochures are showing me. So I went to the field, saw the outcomes. It was a fabulous story. Came back and got involved in fundraising. The business in the meantime was ticking along nicely, just reinvesting its profits and slowly growing the business. But we had, as I said, 6 or 7 staff, nice and simple. After about 9 months, I had gone through this process where I'd been attending the School of Practical Philosophy as a hobby 1 night a week. And if you took all the wisdom of the wise men and women of our past and you could succinctly put it into a statement, it was to love and be loved are the most important things in life, but also to live a life that's of benefit to your fellow man. And if you can have those ingredients built into a core essence of who you are, you'll have a happy life. So I went, cool, okay, so what does that mean with my business? What do I need to arrange here to change that to reflect those values? And I always had a worldview that I own the business never owned me. So I'll make that business do whatever I want it to do. Right? So I said, well, reality is as a fundraiser, I'm a pretty average bloody fundraiser. I'm a far better entrepreneur. So what about if I hire someone to take over my fundraising activities and that I set about to double the size of the business in the next 3 to 5 years? And if I do that, I can give away 50% of my business to set up a foundation for charitable purpose. And the ongoing benefit will continue to fund microfinance programs in the Philippines and other places around the globe, but it could be purpose driven. In other words, I double the business for the benefit of giving to others.
So at that point, you've had some commercial success, some pretty good commercial success. You've sort of done enough to have sort of said, well, you could just cruise now. And
yep.
And then you've had an experience of seeing an opportunity
yep.
that wasn't necessarily commercial. It was an opportunity that was for the good of others.
Yep.
But then you were trying to, I guess, to try and find that confluence of doing something good for people, but also doing something you're good at.
Yes.
In a commercial sense, and those two things came together. So tell us about what happened then.
Okay, so once we got that set up, and I hired someone to take over my volunteering stuff, I went back to work. Well, I suddenly had this vim and vigor now, and well, I've got a reason now to change the world, right? And there's nothing more powerful than when you have a purpose that is bigger than making money for money's sake. It's bigger than ego, because you actually give yourself permission to succeed, to be the very best version of who you are in the world if the beneficiary of it is going to be humanity, right? So I got fired up about growing the business and went borrowing money. And look, to cut a long story short, we were listed on the stock exchange within 3 years. I now had access to grow the business. We ended up developing in New Zealand and Canada, so we ended up in 3 countries. And in the process of doing that, we got to a stage in 2010, this was. So we'd listed in 2005. We were hitting a few home runs. We were going well. And we decided to do a 10-year BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal, as it was called in those days. And what is the business going to look like in 10 years? So the leadership team, we went away, and they came back with all these key ratios and numbers. We want to have 450 employees, we want to be in 4 countries, et cetera, et cetera. And then I sat down in a bit of peace and quiet after that weekend was over, and said, okay, well, remembering that the foundation is now the largest shareholder in the public company. And I'm saying, okay, well, what would that mean for the foundation if we're able to achieve this wonderful 10-year vision? And I sat down and said, okay, well, based on the dividend streams and capital, that we could fund 1 million people out of poverty through microfinance programs. Now, that's not a bad vision. That's not a bad energy getter, to get people fired up and excited about the workplace. So I took my spreadsheet, sent them to my charity partner. They got their CFO to go through and audit it to make sure I had my numbers right. Came back and said, tick the box, yep, that's good. So we then put out into the office and the workplace this message of the key initiatives of where we want to go, but right in the middle was to fund 1 million people out of poverty over the next 10 years. Within 3 months, my head of recruitment comes and says to me, so look, I've got to share with you, we've had a real shift here. We used to have a methodology called top grading about how to identify A-grade players in the marketplace who are looking for a job opportunity. So we could filter out who were the best around, and then we would present them with an offer. And we'd win 50%, we'd lose 50%. She said, what I've found is once we pitch these people and we tell them about our 1 million people out of poverty story, we're now getting 9 out of 10 of the talent coming to join the company. So we're attracting great talent because they want to be able to work for a workplace that represents the values that they hold to be true for them. They want to feel that alignment about who they are. Well, when you get great talent around you, they bring great customers, right? And so the business just performed and took off like a rocket. Within 2 years, the staff came back to me and said, listen, we want to do our own fundraising campaign where we're contributing to this BHAG we've got. Could you work out for us how much we'd need to raise to do 1.5 million people out of poverty? And I said, oh yeah, sure. So we did all the numbers. And then each division would do fundraising activities, and I would take them to the field every year, like the leaders, key fundraising leaders, to India or the Philippines or West Timor or whatever. Each year would do a trip. And they'd see for themselves what the work was like and the outcomes. Well, after about 4 or 5 years down the track, I could see they were going to be a bit short in their numbers of where it was. So I was thinking, how can I make sure that the staff feel that they are still contributing even though they're going to be a bit short here? Or what about if we go to our customers? So I did an introduction letter to all our customers and saying, I'm going to add an extra $1 a week to your rental program that's going to be contributing towards our social purpose, and I gave a paragraph about what our vision was. If you don't want to pay the $1 a week, give me a call personally. Here's my mobile number. Well, no one rang me, did they? So we got 8,000 customers contributing $1 a week towards the project. So we ended up with all our staff, 8,000 customers, all contributing to this vision and this big, hairy, audacious goal. And we got 1.5 million people out of poverty, and we made it by June 2019. So within the 10 years, we made it 6 months early.
Wow!
So it was a hell of a celebration party, I've got to tell you.
Yeah, I bet it was. And I think what I love about that part of the story is this sort of thing which doesn't sort of on surface value make sense in that you're doing something good that's not commercial, but it actually delivers commercial value.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, people seem to misunderstand that social enterprise must be something that you do and perform, and somehow you can't use standard business practices to be able to make an efficient business operation. That's just not true. You really can. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that there's various different types of social enterprises. One is my particular model. If you're giving 50% of your profitable income to charity, you're classified as a social enterprise. But there is others that do difficult workplace integrated social enterprises, which are really created for the purpose of serving the community. Their reason for existence is to employ long-term unemployed people and create job functions for them, and they get support from philanthropy, but most importantly by trading activity. Now, their customers start choosing that particular social enterprise compared to a competitor down the road because they know they're doing social good in their community. So if I'm going to spend my hard-earned cash, I'd rather give it to someone who's doing some good in the community rather than Coca-Cola or a multinational from somewhere else,
Yeah, I love that, because again, what you're talking about is engaging your staff and your employees, but you're engaging your investors, but you're also now engaging your customers.
Yes.
So everyone's sort of buying into this thing, which is sort of in addition to your core business. Your core business has got to be good.
Yeah.
But if you've got a core business plus a mission or a meaning or a purpose, that they also feel some empathy with, then obviously that just turbocharges the opportunity.
It does, and it's a system development model. And when I looked at it from a foundations perspective, if you continually just keep on making donation year after year after year, well then the charity's got to keep coming back with its hat out every year for another donation. Now, in the charity sector, up to 70% of a CEO's time is spent fundraising, not doing the actual good things they need to be doing, but they've got to keep on doing that to get the capital in. setting up social enterprises within charitable organisations with trading activity means their supporter base can buy goods and services from them now that deliver income on a regular basis. So it means the amount of times they have to go out with their hat and get more money is diminishing. So it becomes more sustainable. And that's just a way that reality is that most consumers can't give any more than they're giving. You know, they like to give more, but you know, everybody's got a budget, what they can give. But gee whiz, I can buy goods and services from a social enterprise. That's easy.
Yeah.
That's not hard because I'm doing it at the supermarket anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, I want to make sure we don't gloss over the fact that this big, hairy, audacious goal of growing the business, which was successful, but you know, and you said it sort of fairly quickly, but 1.5 million people taken out of poverty. I mean, to do so while you're actually running an ASX listed business. Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty nice feeling.
It's a great feeling. It's great to see the connection that we had though between the staff that participated in doing this process, you know, because it's not an I, there's a whole collective of wonderful, talented human beings that participated in that journey. And when I stepped down as CEO, you know, the wonderful connection that I had with the staff over the vision and the period about how it made them feel to be fully whole, all right? So because we've got, our workplaces are involved in the external outcomes about how we measure things. You know, profit and loss and performance criteria, or everything's external. There's very few companies that touch the internal basis of who we are as human beings. You know, how can you create workplaces that really give meaning and the reason why you want to come to work, and you want to be the best possible version of who you are in the world, because you know it's having direct impact into ripples of social change. That's the energy that we want to capture. That's the future of what the workplace has got to look like.
Yeah, I love that. And it comes back to an Indigenous person that talked to me about how Indigenous people see culture, and they use this phrase, we-dentity, not identity. And so you've created a we-dentity in your organisation that actually has some sort of connection point that actually is adhesive, but which is amazing. But what I want to move to, because obviously that was, you know, you exited out of that business at some point, and I think now what you're looking at is you've had a really great success, you've had a great experience, but you're looking at outside and thinking, well, what's next? Like, I've done this, I don't necessarily want to start another company and run another company. I've done that. So it seemed to me from our conversations that you started looking at, well, how do we do this at greater scale? How do we look for scale? So talk to us a little bit about that thinking in your process and the development of the Office of Social Impact, which sort of seemed to be a natural flow on from looking at the system and trying to work out how do we change the system?
Yep. So as I said, when I stepped down as CEO, I got out of the business. I was now focused purely on the foundation, and 40% of our grant making was poverty alleviation overseas, 40% was social enterprise in Australia, and 20% was in a family fund that we could use. So I looked at the social enterprise sector saying, okay, what can we do to help grow that sector? And I realised that our capacity to make a difference was limited by the amount of money that we had to give away, because we needed more than what we had capable. So we developed, I had very fortunately got a great CEO out of Sydney, Belinda Morrissey, who's been working with me for 12 years on this project, right? Really talented lady. So we got together and looked at it and said, well, from a systems point of view, the reality is for the ecosystem to grow and thrive, it needs to have structure and systems inside of it to be effective. So social enterprises want to pull a lever and have resources flow. How the plumbing system works in the background, they don't care and they don't understand. But someone's got it, right? So we took it on role that our role is going to be looking how we can develop the system for the ecosystem to thrive. Social procurement's a logical one, getting governments involved. Well, governments need to deal with a peak body and someone who's going to represent the sector in each state. So we played an active role in getting that set up. Then federal government, well, they want to deal with Social Enterprise Australia, the peak body representing the sector. So we helped put that together, and Belinda actually was the chair for that for the first 3 years to get it set up. So that means we're able to secure government funding, where we got 20 odd million from the feds. We've got 100 million just recently been announced for social enterprise funding out of the federals. We then started working with Queensland, and we got really, really lucky. We had a local MP in Toowoomba, David Janetsky, who joined the board of a social enterprise laundry. Okay? And he got inspired about what he saw was the outcomes from a commercial enterprise that was helping long-term unemployed people, refugees and mental illness issues and all that sort of stuff. He saw the outcomes. Well, he gets all fired up and becomes Treasurer of Queensland. And once he gets Treasurer, he's announced he's going to give $80 million over the next 4 years to develop up the social enterprise sector in Queensland. Now, that's huge. That's bigger than ever been done anywhere in Australia. And I was very fortunate that he asked me to chair the round tables for the advisory group to participate. And then I was able to tap my mates in the philanthropy world and get them to come up to Queensland to saying, okay, if projects that we deliver out of this Office of Social Impact, if they align to the areas of your interest, would you look at matching the donations for? And we got a letter of intent signed by the foundation saying we're keen to participate. So foundations are really keen to be able to work with governments as well to enable these types of projects at social enterprises. So it's a three-legged stool that's really having some wonderful traction.
Yeah, awesome. And so it almost seems like we're seeing a maturing of the sector. If you think about the doing good sector,
sure.
You know, which was, you know, maybe churches and religious organisations, and then government sort of started to do some of that, and then good people started charities, and they were taking donations from initially wealthy people, and then other people worked out how to do that. So now it sort of seems like we're moving into, I mean, you've got social enterprise, you've got B Corps, you've got impact investors. It does seem like the community, the commercial and social community are sort of working a little bit more in lockstep to actually try and work out how do we do this. Is that how you see things?
I do, and I see, well, you would know it from your own MBA classes, the number of talented guys that are coming through and girls who are coming through MBA classes are keen to participate in a purpose-driven organisation. You know, there's more of that. I'm seeing a lot more of that energy coming through. But on the bigger scale of things, you know, the impact, I'm on a strategic advisory role with an AI company in Queensland. And so I've been doing a deep dive into the influence of what AI is going to do and how that's going to affect the social sector. And the reality is that artificial intelligence is going to do away with a lot of the mundane roles that many of us have to go to do for working. And the unique characteristic of us as human beings is going to be raised up as being something that is refined and will have greater social outcomes. So I think that while there's a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt about what AI might look like, I've got a bit of a rose-coloured glasses, and I think that the potential for improving social impact using the human beings that have now got a heart focus into that space, because a lot of the mundane workplace environments have gone. So therefore that connection about changing the economy from being human beings work for this thing called the economy to what about if we make it a people economy? And the reason why the economy exists is to serve the people. That sort of shift of totally reversing the role. Well, AI's got that capacity to reverse how we see what an economy looks like and what are the role of us as human beings contributing into the benefit of others.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's that flipping it as something that's bad that's going to happen, which is, you know, it's like when the PC came out, everyone thought we were only going to be working 3-day weeks, but ultimately humans want to do stuff.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that if we improve our productivity, you know, using technology, we're releasing some capacity into the system, and that's happening at the same time as people are realizing actually happiness doesn't come from success or pursuit. Happiness comes from doing something that is worthwhile and something that maybe is not just about me, it's about others.
Yeah, well, it's an alignment of human beings acting from their moral compass. When you've got a clear set of values about what's important into your life, and then you shape your workplace environment that puts it absolutely in alignment to what those values are, and you express those into the world, not only do you become happier, but you become more productive. You create more into the world because you've got that beautiful alignment of the inner world with the outer world. Once you've got that alignment, you become very powerful in what you can create.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. I think it's those synergies which between doing good and doing well come together.
Yeah,
which I think is great. So look, just lastly, this is a off the record question that I hadn't talked to you about, but you know that we're developing this Impact Academy, and we talk about humble discovery. How do you use humility, which is in essence is thinking a bit not less of yourself, but less about yourself, and thinking more of others and trying to think of others and trying to work out, well, how can I actually make a contribution to society? Yeah. We fundamentally are looking for this idea around humility. So in your own words, how would you describe the characteristics that someone that you see that actually wants to make a difference? Yeah. How would you describe that human to me?
Okay, this is a really interesting question. a good friend of mine is Dr. Kirsten Ferguson, has just written a book called Blind Spotting, and which she asked me to review and make some comments on. And I found it a very useful tool for guidance for people for questions like this. And there's 3 simple steps with it. One is intellectual honesty. Recognize what you know and you don't know. Identify what are the things that really are important to you, all right? Be truly honest about what that statement is, okay? And recognize that we all have blind spots about what we don't know, okay? What are the components that I need to know and discover to make my whole picture internally look complete? So with aspect of curiosity to be able to inquire and discover that learning process which you do so beautifully in your courses, all right? Because that's all the curiosity getting satiated. And then have flexibility, so that you can adjust your lifespan, shape of your life that reflects this view that you've created of your future vision self. Okay, so you've got to have intellectual honesty, and you've got to be very curious about what you don't know and discover what you do, and then have the flexibility to adapt and change to position yourself into that new future.
Wow. I think you've just given me another text that I need to use for my course, which is, that's fabulous. I mean, that's exactly what I think we're trying to do in Impact Academy. And I think what I've loved about, even we've just finished our first semester of Impact Academy, and what I love is this just seeing the lights turn on, and you would see this all the time, see the lights turn on. It happened to you all those years ago, running the jazz festivals, and you see someone whose light gets turned on. There's a connection at the heart level where they actually find a meaning which is deeper than just them. But I think what we're trying to do in Impact Academy is partner that with an idea that is scalable, is an idea that's not just a doing good, for helping people. There's a lot of homeless people, there's a lot of people that are suffering, but trying to find this sustainable, this intersection between sort of innovation and empathy. These 2 things coming together, and I think that's what we're trying to do in Impact.
And that's really what good social enterprise is all about, all right? So in the sense of we are serving a social purpose, so you've got that clear vision of the transformation you're wanting to bring into the world, but you're using the best of your commercial skills and logistical skills to be able to execute well. Because there's no point having grand visions and plans about what a future state can look like if you don't develop well the ability to execute it. It becomes a dream, all right? So we must be able to have skills developed around us to execute well, so the vision becomes a reality. Yeah, and that's the importance of it.
I love that. And in some sense, what you're saying is you've got to have your head and your heart engaged simultaneously.
Well, it's interesting, Kirsten Ferguson, the author I was just talking about, she wrote a book called Head and Heart Leadership, exactly about that, lining up both. Once you do that, it becomes powerful.
Love it. Thanks so much for your time, Allan. That's been great.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks, Gal.
Great.